In May, we first told you about cases of abuse and neglect found in some of Oklahoma's veteran centers. Now, investigative reports acquired by ONR and the Journal Record provide gruesome new details of a confirmed case of abuse that cost an Oklahoma veteran his life at the facility in Claremore. The discovery comes as 2 legislative studies begin to investigate ongoing allegations of abuse and neglect at the state-run veteran centers. Some of the images in this report are graphic.
Peter J. Minter was a World War II veteran. He died in the early morning hours of May 3rd at the Claremore Veterans Center from what the state medical examiner eventually ruled were complications from second-degree thermal burns over 50% of his body. The 85-year-old man entered the facility suffering from several medical conditions, including Alzheimer's. His wife, Frances Minter, showed up twice every day to make sure Jay, as he was known, was properly fed and his personal hygiene was taken care of. On the afternoon of May 3rd, she arrived on the floor where her husband lived and saw the physician assistant and a nurse rush into her husband's room.
So I rushed to the door real fast, knocked on the door, started to push my way into the room. And Ken Adams met me, and he said, "Miss Minter, something has happened." He said, "You have to wait outside the room until I have time to examine him."
When she got inside, what she saw was unimaginable.
My husband had his legs up in the air, and he made eye contact with me and was screaming, "They burned my legs, they burned my legs." And I think he said about 3 times, "They burned my legs." I was just horrified because the skin was hanging off of his legs.
The pictures she took on her cell phone show how badly Jay Minter had been burned. Huge blisters and skin hanging from his legs were evidence of what he had endured. Mrs. Minter says at first the explanation she got had nothing to do with scalding.
I turned to Ken and I said, "What in the world happened?" And he said, I think that it was probably the medication that I might have given him, the antibiotic that I gave him the day before."
She stayed with her husband through that night and was there when his life ended, about 11 hours later.
I watched my husband, and his head was going up and down and up and down. And then I put my hand on his chest. He took his last breath.
The investigative reports by the Department of Human Services Adult Protection Division make it clear what actually happened to Peter J. Minter. On the afternoon of May 2nd of this year, Mr. Minter was taken to the shower room at the Claremore Center for a whirlpool bath. A lone certified nursing assistant put him in the water up to his waistline and then began attending to another patient she was bathing while supervising 2 other men in the showers. DHS and an investigation by the Oklahoma Department of Veterans Affairs both substantiated allegations of abuse by the certified nursing assistant. She told investigators the only way she had to test the heat of the water was by sticking her hand inside the whirlpool. DHS investigators found that the whirlpool involved had no working device to limit the heat of the water. There also was no device the nursing assistant could rely on to show an accurate reading of the actual water temperature. Nonetheless, she decided to put Mr. Minter in the water anyway and turned her attention to the man nearby that she was bathing at a sink. That prompted the Department of Human Services to reach the conclusion that the complaints of caretaker neglect and abuse were substantiated against the nurse's aide, and the condition of the whirlpools and the staffing also against the Claremore Veterans Center. The report further concludes that the water temperature was very hot and exceeded federal guidelines of a maximum of 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Tests performed by ODVA's investigator Stephen Pancoast on water in the whirlpool that was involved produced a temperature reading of 127 degrees after running the hot water for just 5 minutes. At 130 degrees, skin burns in 30 seconds. DHS investigators asked the certified nursing assistant involved if Mr. Minter indicated the water was hot when she put him in just over his waist. She told them he made no sounds and did not indicate any pain, and that in fact he wasn't responding to her in any way before the bath. But the certified nursing assistant is not the only one DHS and ODVA investigators identified in their abuse and neglect investigations. DHS sent a letter to the Oklahoma Board of Examiners for Long-Term Care Administrators stating that their investigation concluded Claremore Administrator Cynthia Adams violated 2 of the organization's codes that could result in revocation of her license, fines, or other punishments. Rule 5 is identified as gross negligence, or negligence that constitutes a danger to the health, welfare, or safety of the residents or the public. Rule 9 lists failure to comply with state and federal requirements applicable to the facility. The Board of Examiners just received that report and has begun the process of reviewing the information. The Veterans Administration investigation also substantiated allegations of causing or permitting harm or lack of supervision against a registered nurse, the house supervisor, and the director of nursing. The DHS investigation singles out physician's assistant Ken Adams as failing to follow proper procedure by not correcting staff members who repeatedly referred to him as Dr. Adams. The investigative report from the Oklahoma Department of Veterans Affairs also explains why the state medical examiner never had a chance to conduct an autopsy and did not view the body and reach a probable cause of death finding until Mr. Minter had already been embalmed. The report found that a Claremore police officer suggested to the ODVA investigator Stephen Pancoast that he call the medical examiner's office and find out what they were told that resulted in them waiving jurisdiction. Pancoast followed up on that idea and was told by the medical examiner investigator that physician's assistant Ken Adams told them they had a death that involved only minor thermal burns, and the cause of death was atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, and the medical director at the Claremore Veterans Center did not feel the injuries sustained caused or contributed to Mr. Minter's death. Ken Adams told DHS investigators he never called the center's medical director to tell him what was going on, and Frances Minter says the medical director never saw her husband's injuries or was called to help decide whether he should be taken to the hospital.
He didn't know anything about it until the next morning.
A month after Mr. Minter died, Ken Adams retired from the Claremore Veterans Center. Frances Minter has filed a tort claim seeking damages from the state. Such claims rarely are addressed by the state, and the next step after that is a lawsuit.
There's some things that need to be corrected, in my opinion, after I've been there for this long, that there are just some places that have begun to deteriorate, especially within the last 2 years. The picture of my husband's death does tell you that that's how far things have deteriorated.
Frances Minter says what many others have said who came before her. People who lost loved ones or had them badly injured and ended up going to court against the Oklahoma Department of Veterans Affairs.
That this will help many other veterans. That my testimony and my husband's death will help other people to prevent this from happening again.
State Senator Frank Simpson has launched his task force that will examine ODVA and its 7 centers. Representatives Joe Dorman and Richard Morissette plan to launch their interim study of the agency next month.